at Hangar X in Florida. On screen, you have that incredible view of the Dragon spacecraft with the crew access arm still in the service position. The crew right now is on board Dragon, waiting to get the green light to stow the crew arm for launch and arm the launch escape system. Great shot of our astronauts there. Once the launch director gives the go-ahead, we should get a good view of the access arm as it swings away from the capsule. The range continues to be go for launch, monitoring the clearance area surrounding our launch pad, as well as the air and sea space along the flight corridor. And at Kennedy Space Center, weather is looking good for launch. If you're joining us on the ground in Florida, you know it's just about 82 degrees outside with light ground winds. Overall, we are looking good for launch in just about 45 minutes with a 5% chance of weather violation. Right now, we are listening in for that readiness poll announcement and instructions to our launch team. Again, this poll is going to be the go or no-go to move forward with propellant loading for today. As soon as that briefing ends, we should see that crew access arm, which you can see lit up on your screen right now, immediately start to move away from the capsule when that stow procedure begins. Coming up on just 43 minutes to launch. Great nighttime views of our Falcon 9 and Crew-7 capsule there on the screen.
SpaceX Dragon.
Go ahead, Dragon.
We didn't hear the poll for prop load and launch readiness. We're just giving a call.
And sorry, Dragon, I just missed the last of your sentence there. Can you please repeat?
Yeah, from Dragon, we
the polling is complete. The joint NASA and SpaceX teams have polled go for LES arm, propellant load, and launch. For all operators in MCCX and Hangar X, both control rooms go into lockdown in T-minus 45 minutes and will remain in that state until the launch escape system is disarmed. All operators are to remain at their console, maintain a sterile cockpit until MD confirms successful disarming the launch escape system following orbit insertion or propellant offload in the event of a scrub. For non-urgent, no-go conditions, brief the CE or LD and they will approve aborting the countdown. For urgent issues affecting the safety of the operation, operators shall call hold on the countdown net. Launch control will abort the launch audio sequence immediately and proceed into launch abort. At T-minus 10 seconds, launch control will be hands-off and relying on automated abort criteria for the remainder of the count. Operators advise the launch director whether structural breakup or fires imminent or occurring per Dragon manual escape flight rules. Launch control at this time, you may proceed with arming the crew arm for movement.
Copy, proceeding to arm crew arm for movement.
And with that, we are moving forward toward launch. Propellant loading will begin in just over 5 minutes, but in the meantime, let's check back in with Daryl and Jessica.
All right, thank you very much, Ronnie.
Crew access arm retraction started.
We now have crew access arm retraction. So if you look in your screen, you can see there the crew access arm moving away from the Dragon. Another great shot of it there, articulating away. It takes about 90 seconds to 2 minutes to move away, and this is a critical milestone, Jessica, as that arm moves away, because now that means if the astronauts needed to get off that rocket for whatever reason, they could either bring the arm back quickly, and it can move, as I understand it, a lot faster than it's moving now in the case of an emergency egress, or they would move forward and arm the launch escape system. That hasn't been armed yet. So this is the moving and stowing of the crew access arm so that we can clear that away from the rocket and get ready to lift off. After that,
Crew access arm retraction.
we're now waiting to hear that Dragon is go for Section 7, closing the visors and arming
Dragon,
the launch
SpaceX,
escape system.
You are go for Section 6, closed visors and arm launch escape system.
Well, they changed the number, but it's the same.
Dragon copies, go for Section 6, launch escape system arming.
Same milestone.
I hear from previous crews that this system arms the very loud thump, so they can actually hear that on board.
Which makes sense. You've got those engines, those Super Dracos, which are
Dragon visor closed, arming launch escape system.
right there next to their heads, right? You know, because
Copy,
those-
your go.
Right, and sounds like that was Jasmin saying she was ready to arm, and that command can be sent from either the ground or the crew, and the crew is sending that command now to arm that system. And that launch escape system is, of course, the system that will propel us away from the rocket, the crew capsule itself with the crew inside, in the event of any type of emergency with the rocket. And that is, of course, a system that we hope to never use, but it consists of 8 Super Draco thrusters on this Dragon vehicle that are used only for this abort. And we say we hope to never use it. We hope to not be in the situation, but we have had situations where we've had incredible in-flight tests. Unintentional, for example, there was the launch abort for the Soyuz for Nick Hague's first launch in 2018. Pretty exciting event, dynamic time, but something that showed us how robust these systems are. It performed nominally and carried Nick Hague and Alexei Ovchinin back to safety.
Verified armed.
we got the verification of the launch escape system now armed. You mentioned Nick Hague. As I understand it, he counts himself having gone to space twice.
That's right, or at least 1.5. But this system is now active. They do that 2 minutes before loading of the prop, since that, of course, then does present a more risky situation with that prop on board, and it will stay armed all the way through orbital insertion. I've also been told by previous Dragon crews that you can hear the system of valves opening and actually even the flow of the fuel itself as it comes on board.
The scenarios in which the launch escape system would be used.
F9 tanks venting for prop load in 10 seconds. Expect loud venting.
There they are warning them about that, exactly what you just mentioned, giving them a heads up that they'll be hearing those sounds.
Yeah, Victor Glover was telling me it's a very noticeable process. You can hear the opening and closing of the valves, and there are these low hums and kind of a fluttering sound as that super cold liquid oxygen and kerosene fill those large propellant tanks, first on the first stage and then on the second stage. Must be pretty exciting to be hearing those noises, knowing what that means and how much closer you're getting to liftoff.
This is pretty unique in the launch industry, right? Where the astronauts are inside the Dragon, inside their spacecraft, as it's being loaded with propellants.
That's correct.
That launch escape system you're talking about, if it were needed, it can get the crew several miles offshore out into the Atlantic Ocean. It's those Super Draco engines capable of moving Dragon half a mile in just 7.5 seconds. So that's equivalent to a peak velocity of 436 miles per hour. So it really moves. It can also get it off the top of a moving rocket as well. So it's got to have that kind of power.
Right, at all those different phases, all the way until they're in orbit. And that's one of the things that we protect for here as well when we look at the weather forecast. It's not just for the actual launch itself, but to protect for any of those contingency landing scenarios in the various areas where they would splash down in that event.
Propellant load has started.
And so now the propellants are flowing into the Falcon 9 rocket. RP1, refined kerosene, and liquid oxygen, the oxidizer. That part we can see externally because as the liquid oxygen levels rise inside the Falcon 9, it is of course super chilled liquid oxygen, highly densified, and it will super chill the skin as well of the rocket, and it'll condense the air around it. And there's been well over 200 Falcon 9 launches, so if you've seen one before, you're familiar with the sight. The rocket condensing that air, that warm, humid Florida air, which we have been enjoying this evening, at least with a light breeze.
That's right. I think it's cooler than Houston anyway, so I'm enjoying my time here.
Good, good. All right, for another update, let's send it out to Hawthorne, California, an update from SpaceX.
Thanks, Daryl and Jessica. Now, before we send them to space, let's get to know our Crew-7 astronauts a little better. We'll start off with none other than the commander herself, NASA astronaut Jasmin Moghbeli, making her debut spaceflight.
My name is Jasmin Moghbeli. I'm the commander of NASA's SpaceX Crew-7 mission to the International Space Station. Baldwin, New York is where I grew up. I always loved team sports from a really young age because you rely on one another, and that's something that I think is really important to know going forward in your career. I joined the Marine Corps. Sure, I wanted to fly jets. I thought you had to be a jet pilot to become an astronaut. I actually went to watch STS-116 launch while I was waiting to start flight school, and Sunny Williams happened to be on that flight. I realized she was a Navy helicopter pilot, and from that point on, I went full steam ahead. All four of us are so proud to represent what is possible when we come together. Ultimately, everything we do is to benefit the Earth.
Right next to Jasmin in Dragon Endurance is Andreas Mogensen, today's pilot representing the European Space Agency and making his second trip to low Earth orbit.
My name's Andreas Mogensen, and I'm the pilot of NASA's SpaceX Crew-7 mission to the International Space Station. I was born in Copenhagen, Denmark. In 2008, ESA were looking to select a new class of astronauts, and I applied together with about 8,500 Europeans. So I thought, there's just no way that I'll get selected. The chances of being selected are too small. But that changed when we were down to about 20 candidates. My first mission to the International Space Station was on a short 10-day mission. I had to hit the ground running as soon as I arrived on board, and as soon as I landed back on the Earth, I knew that I wanted to go back to the space station. I'm especially proud of the fact that our Crew-7 mission has 4 different astronauts from 4 different countries and 4 different agencies.
Next up, mission specialist Satoshi Furukawa. This JAXA astronaut is no stranger to the space station after spending 165 days in orbit as part of expeditions 28 and 29 in 2011.
My name is Satoshi Furukawa. I am a mission specialist for NASA SpaceX Crew-7 mission to the International Space Station. I was born in Yokohama, Kanagawa, which is right south of Tokyo. The first human landing on the moon when I was 5 years old. I thought it was a great moment for humankind. I had a longing for space from my childhood. The moment I was selected as a Japanese astronaut candidate, you are hired, you are selected. It was the happiest moment in my life. Crew-7, we are conducting many scientific researches on the space station to benefit future space explorers. I am very proud of being a part of this excellent team of international partners and also researchers, engineers, flight controllers, flight directors, and so on. Because working as a team and working together, we can accomplish the big mission.
Rounding out our fully international crew is Roscosmos cosmonaut Konstantin Borisov. He was selected to the cosmonaut corps in 2018 and today marks his first flight to the orbiting laboratory.
My name is Konstantin Borisov, and I'm a mission specialist for NASA's SpaceX Crew-7 mission to the International Space Station. For those who ask what spaceflight is, I would say that we have 3 big jobs on the space station. First job is experiments. Second job is take care of the station, doing the maintenance, repair what's broken, storing things, restoring things, cleaning up. And the third big topic is actually taking care of your body, because in weightlessness you cannot help but train. I think many people don't understand that technology advancement which we have had during the last 50 years mainly comes from space exploration. People get very comfortable with using their phone, and we have very fast computers in space. Motivates us to create those advancements. I want to take part in it, and I want to put my small stone into this pavement which leads us to the new asteroids, to the new planets, and to the new systems.
Now, as we see with all of our crews, these 4 crew members who make up Crew-7 have a mission patch they worked together to design.
The first thing that you notice is the white dragon on top of the Earth, its neck craned into the number 7 for Crew-7. Its tail curves upwards towards a golden star, and they say that symbolizes our ascent towards the stars and the pioneering spirit needed to propel us further into space. The blue, white, and red on the tail are the common colors in the flags of all 4 nations flying on this mission.
Now we are less than 30 minutes to launch, so let's check back in with Daryl and Jessica at KSC, where the countdown continues.
All right, thank you very much. Everything going well with the countdown so far. A little over a mile and a half from the launch pad we're going from today, this morning, 39A, is 39B, where the mobile launcher is back out on the pad right now, going through testing for the Artemis II crewed mission to the moon late next year. Here's more about Artemis in our Moon Minute. For the first time, Artemis II astronauts got an up-close look at the Orion spacecraft that will fly them around the moon. Astronauts Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Cook, and Jeremy Hansen visited Orion at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
And it looks amazing. Their handiwork is gorgeous. I'm ready to take it for a spin.
Until launch day arrives, the crew is training at the Johnson Space Center in Texas. They use the Neutral Buoyancy Lab, a giant pool, to practice safely getting out of a floating mock-up of Orion. And it's not an easy task. Navy divers in rafts will harness and hoist the astronauts into the air by helicopter, where they will be taken to a nearby Navy vessel. Back at Kennedy, we got a look at the brand new Artemis crew transportation vehicles.
So the first 9 miles of the journey to the moon starts in these crew transport vehicles.
On launch day, these fully electric, zero-emission vehicles by Canoe Technologies will reunite the Artemis II astronauts with Orion at Launch Complex 39B. NASA's powerful moon rocket, the Space Launch System, and Orion will carry them on the rest of the 250,000-mile journey to the moon. And that's your Artemis Moon Minute. And for Artemis updates, there's a QR code on the bottom left of your screen, right there, actually bottom right. You can visit, you can use your cell phone to scan it, or you can visit the website at nasa.gov/Artemis2. Earlier this evening, our own NASA's Jasmin Hopkins caught up with NASA Administrator Bill Nelson, who is here watching the launch from SpaceX's firing room.
Administrator Nelson, today marks a first for NASA, the first time in a single launch that each astronaut represents a different space agency. So we have NASA, ESA, JAXA, and Roscosmos. What do you make of this diverse crew?
Well, it's a sign of our times. We are an international program. For example, we're going back to the moon in order to go to Mars. It's going to be an international mission that will launch with an international crew. So too, tonight's launch is entirely an international crew, save for the commander, Jasmin, an American astronaut. And so here we go. Now, isn't it interesting that what space does in our NASA program, it unifies us. It brings people together. And this is so true with what we're seeing tonight.
Right, and Administrator, you recently visited South America, and later on this year you're planning to visit India as well. Why is it so important for NASA to foster these international partnerships?
They are delighted, indeed eager, to learn more about NASA and to partner with NASA. And so that's what we find when we go to another country. It's usually the president that wants to see us. And for example, in this South American trip, we talked to the president of Brazil and Colombia about what NASA can provide in the way of information from our satellites to help them protect the Amazon rainforest from being destroyed, which is a high agenda item for those countries. Indeed, it's a high agenda item for the entire world. I'm going to India. India is one that we want to have a close relationship with. We've already been doing things such as science experiments with India. We've got a major science program going that will be Earth observing with India next January. But now we're going to train and fly an Indian astronaut. So it is happening as we speak, and the United States has been the beneficiary of it.
Absolutely. Administrator Nelson, thank you so much. Back to you.
As we continue to count down, let's take a closer look at the vehicles that will be taking Crew-7 to the International Space Station today. Starting from the very top of the vehicle is the Dragon spacecraft. In total, there are 16 Draco thrusters Dragon can use in space to help navigate the spacecraft to its destination, each providing 90 pounds of force. That doesn't include the 8 Super Draco thrusters used for an abort, which are no longer active once the crew is in orbit.
And just wanted to note, one thing that we did miss just a moment ago was a call to the crew. There was a sensor issue that they are tracking. However, they are just continuing with the count, continuing to monitor it. And so we are continuing to discuss what we have in front of us, which is Dragon. Together, the Dragon spacecraft and its trunk stand over 26 feet tall. There are 2 windows on the spacecraft, plus 1 under the nose cone. The nose cone opens shortly after launch to expose the forward bulkhead thrusters and docking mechanism that will connect with the space station. Dragon's trunk holds solar cells, which power Dragon while it's in free flight. The trunk can also carry unpressurized cargo, and on some cargo resupply missions, we use Dragon's trunk to deliver the new solar arrays that are being installed on the space station.
As always, Dragon will be delivered to orbit today by SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket, which provides 1.7 million pounds of thrust on its first stage, thanks to its 9 Merlin M1D engines. Once the first and second stages separate, these engines are also used to help land the first stage. The first stage will perform 3 burns today as it makes its way back down to Earth. First is the boost back burn, where 3 of the M1D engines will reignite to help flip the first stage around to head back to the launch site. The second burn is the entry burn. That's where a single engine will reignite and shut down to help slow Falcon 9 down as it prepares to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. And then finally, the landing burn. That'll be where 3 engines will slow down the rocket enough to perform a precision landing back down on landing zone 1.
Meanwhile, the second stage continues to orbit, powered by one single Merlin vacuum engine with over 220,000 pounds of thrust. The second stage will secure Dragon's entry into low Earth orbit before separating, leaving Dragon to continue its journey to the space station on its own thrusters. About 40 seconds after separation, Dragon's nose cone deploy sequence will begin, exposing its guidance navigation controls that help Dragon autonomously fly to the space station.
With T0 coming up in just about 20 minutes, our teams at the Cape in Hangar X are doing a series of system checks to ensure Dragon and Falcon 9 are ready. Let's check in with Ronnie for a quick status update. How's it going, Ronnie?
Thanks, Jesse. We are still looking good for an on-time launch just over 20 minutes from now, and we'll keep monitoring all the vehicle systems. There we heard the call out for RP1 load complete on stage 2. So that means we are, of course, getting closer to liftoff. Both Dragon and Falcon 9 continue to be healthy, and we're not tracking any major issues at this time. Right now, we're continuing to prep the vehicle for flight, and propellant loading began at T-minus 35 minutes. We also heard the call out a few minutes ago that the launch escape system is now armed. The range, which is monitoring keep-out zones and among other key flight requirements, also continues to report no issues, and they are go to support launch tonight. Weather also looks good, and we are still tracking just a 5% chance of violation at our T0 time. But as a reminder, today we have an instantaneous launch window, driven by the orbital mechanics constraints of 2 spacecraft meeting in orbit. Fun fact, the technical term for that meeting is called a rendezvous. So at this point, if we hear a hold for any reason, we will have to stand down tonight because of that instantaneous launch window, and instead target our backup opportunity, which is tomorrow at 3:04 a.m. Eastern Time. But for now, with all systems go, let's turn it back over to Courtney for a status update from Houston.
Thanks, Ronnie. The flight controllers here in Mission Control Houston are ensuring that the space station is ready to receive Dragon. They're also checking all communication links between the station, Dragon, and the ground are working properly, and right now everything is proceeding as planned. Teams here in Mission Control Houston, the team in Hawthorne, and the astronauts aboard the station will monitor the autonomous docking of Dragon tomorrow when they enter joint operations, which happens when the spacecraft enters the approach ellipsoid, which is an invisible boundary that helps us monitor spacecraft arriving and departing. After docking, the crews will perform a series of leak checks, then work to open the hatches both on the Dragon side and inside the station's pressurized mating adapter. We expect hatch opening to happen about an hour and a half after docking. Once on board, the astronauts will be greeted by the space station crew and will then join in for opening remarks for the new crew members. Here in Mission Control, Flight Director Chris Dobbins is on console overseeing the team for launch, and Flight Director Judd Freeling will be on console tomorrow for docking. That's it from here in Mission Control Houston. I'll toss it back to the team in Florida. Daryl, how's it looking?
All right, thank you very much, Courtney. And if you just joined us, T-minus 17 minutes and counting from the 7th astronaut rotation mission to the International Space Station under NASA's Commercial Crew Program. Commander Jasmin Moghbeli, pilot Andreas Mogensen, or Andy Mogensen, and mission specialist Satoshi Furukawa and Konstantin Borisov are strapped into their seats inside the Dragon Endurance. They're at the top of the rocket. Falcon 9 rocket fueling. That operation is well underway. Launch escape system is armed. Of course, that means Dragon is prepared to launch itself.
SpaceX, stand by for an update on the sensor. Teams are still discussing and looking for our path forward.
As you just heard there, SpaceX is
SpaceX Dragon copy.
Looking at a sensor issue. And so trying to determine if the sensor is giving good data, good reading, or if...
Startup stage 2, LOX loading.
If they're looking at something else, of course, we'll keep close tabs on that. In the meantime, propellant load continues.
I think sometimes you have hits on sensors for other reasons. We want to make sure that we are getting an accurate reading of what's happening with the system they're looking at. Probably trying to decide if it's a real signal or if it's a hit from some other reason.
There's a lot of redundancy in the systems, as you mentioned, and those sensors have to make sure that the engineers understand exactly what they're looking at. So we'll, again, keep tabs. In the meantime, here's a little bit about Crew-7. Lieutenant Colonel Jasmin Moghbeli, a military helicopter test pilot. There she is. She hails from Long Island, New York. She's a mother to 2 twin girls, and she is the mission commander. This is pilot Andy Mogensen's second trip to space station. His first was as the flight engineer for the ESA Iris mission in 2015. Mission specialist Satoshi Furukawa's interest in space began when he was 5 years old and he saw the Apollo 11 moon landing on TV. And mission specialist Konstantin Borisov was selected to be a cosmonaut in 2018, and this will be his first trip to space. We've got more than 10,000 people all gathered, including these folks. Some special students. Those kids are, I shouldn't call them kids, they're students, right? College students. They're part of the First Nations launch, and they're giving us a big wave from the Banana Creek viewing location. They're from the University of Washington, University of Colorado, and Queen's University. They're visiting as part of NASA's First Nations launch, an Artemis Student Challenge, where they design, build, and launch their own high-powered rockets. And those students that you saw there in the stands, they were the grand prize winners. So welcome and enjoy the launch. T-minus 14 minutes and counting. Awaiting Crew-7 are 7 crew members at their destination at the International Space Station. I caught up with 3 of them as they were zipping around the Earth.
Hey, Daryl, good morning.
Well, good morning to you, Frank, Stephen, and Woody. Okay, minutes away from liftoff. You're inside the spacecraft. What's it like?
The rocket is a living, breathing machine. We fuel the Falcon 9 rocket on the pad while the crew is on board. I expected that my heart would be racing, but actually it was just so much like training that I felt quite calm.
Well, I'm sure calm will give way to excitement, right, when Crew-7 comes aboard. What do you think that'll be like?
More than anything, it's your friends coming up to station, right? And so you get to hug and greet your friends that you haven't seen for several months. And it's always just a really fun reunion.
You know, they're coming on board. They're going to live on board. It's really exciting to greet them as new friends and crewmates.
Well, those new friends and crewmates, will you have any advice for them when they come on board, like things to do, things not to do?
The awesome thing is that we have an amazing ground team that catches all of it and keeps us honest and keeps us out of trouble. And so you can just kind of relax and enjoy it and just allow yourself to take it in, because it really is a pretty special experience.
Really enjoy your time up here with the people, with the environment, and with the opportunity to work up here and look at the Earth. It's really amazing. Just really enjoy it.
All right, speaking of enjoyment, do you have a fun way to confirm that you're in space, something you can do? You want to give that move a score, Jessica?
I don't know. It required assistance from 2 crew members, so I don't know. I'll give it an 8.5.
Okay, that was very kind. All right, well, before the Crew-7 got into their spacecraft, they got a picture with the Falcon 9 booster that will take them up into space. There they are on the business end of those 9 Merlin engines. Once we leave planet Earth, these fine folks at Johnson Space Center will take over.
Dragon
This is mission
SpaceX,
control.
We are still continuing to assess that sensor and proceeding with the count.
Okay, so as you heard, they're
SpaceX Dragon copies, continuing with the count while the tubes assess.
still working the sensor, but at the same time continuing to load the propellants on board Falcon. So Jessica, as we count down these last few minutes, you've got the launch team. They're taking a look at a sensor and some of the readings there. At the same time, we're proceeding forward, and they're communicating with the astronauts inside. And so as we get down to these final minutes, any thoughts?
This is an exciting time for the crew. You know, they're probably running through some checklists of their own right now. They may be pretty busy in there, going through those same things that they've done in their simulations so many times before. But I bet it's getting pretty real right now. And hearing those calls about the sensor probably raises a few questions as well. But I know the ground will keep them informed as we go. 10 minutes. It's getting very close.
Indeed it is. And tracking everything are Leah and Ronnie at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. Will take us through the rest of the count.
Thanks, Daryl. Our next major countdown event will be at the T-minus 10-minute mark, so coming up here,
And
when the
Dragon
Falcon 9
SpaceX,
launch
stand by for display configuration.
There we go ahead.